Kia ora koutou. Welcome back to this briefing on local water done well, latest update in this process for us. I'll pass on to Sean to introduce us on this briefing today. This is an open briefing, so welcome to everyone who has joined us online. Just to mention again, apologies from Councillor Pravanov and Councillor Coe, and the Mayor is online at the moment as well. So look forward to this briefing. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Lawrence. So morning, everybody. So we booked this session in earlier in the process to give you some more feedback and some more updates, an update around some of the additional work that had been happening around harmonisation and other bits and pieces. But we've also going to use this opportunity to give you an update in terms of the submissions, even though it only closed on Sunday. We've still been obviously been out of pop-ups, engaging with the community. So we've got quite a some sense of some of the issues that are being raised through that. We haven't been through all of the submissions, obviously, and had a look at the key themes, but there are quite a few things that were raised multiple times. Obviously, we went to the first public meeting that the Kapiti Concerned Ratepayers had, so that was also quite a good way to get some measure from what people were concerned about at that session, some people. And then we've had pop-ups across the district, and certainly the Paikokariki one and the Paraparumu one that I went to. Again, similar questions, really. A lot of the same themes coming up through those sessions, people putting submissions in. So we've got a little bit of that we want to talk to you about, update in terms of some of the other work that's happening, and then obviously the where to from here sort of conversation as well. So I'll hand over to Marty to run through the session, and I think we'll take questions at the end maybe, or depending on how we go. I don't know if we've got anything else after this, but
There's nothing else after this, so
okay.
Let's try and hold questions, shall we, and just get through the information.
All right, good morning, and thank you. So we closed the consultation on Local Water Done Well closed on Sunday at midnight. So these are very preliminary results. So we just want to share those with you, give you the high level results from the online survey. There are also emails and hard copies that are yet to be put into the system. So again, just a preliminary steer on where it's sitting from the online results. Touch on some of the specific matters that have been picked up through the consultation and some of those conversations around considerations that people are thinking through, and then looking at the next steps going forward. So just an overview of the consultation itself. There were 5 local pop-ups right across the communities in Kapiti. There was a live webinar. Council representatives and the Mayor attended a community concerned ratepayers meeting. There were the digital channels, and frequently asked questions were being provided and updated as questions came through. Email to ratepayers went out to everyone that we had on the database with an email, also a flyer. So really just putting a big carpet out in terms of asking the question to get that submission, get some feedback. And off the back of that, there was over 520 submissions that we've got currently. So just under 420 of those were online submissions through the Have Your Say portal. And also there's 103 plus or thereabouts, collecting in from the different centres and libraries, hard copies and emails. So those are the ones that are taking the time to process. So that's why that's sort of these preliminary results. And we're also working on producing a report on the themes, on the commentary. So there's about 100 or so of those submissions had additional considerations in them as well. So we're just running through that and getting a consultancy firm to look at summarising that up, so you got a flavour of what those additional considerations or questions coming through were from the consultation. In terms of the high level numbers, so there's option 1, option 2. The results from the online component is that 94% were in favour of option 1 and 6% in favour of option 2. That sends a strong signal. The other interesting part is we also asked about the community priorities, and you understand as we've been going through this process, we've developed those community priorities, and in terms of supporting the decision around the model. So we asked the question, what are your priorities? And this is the feedback in terms of where those landed. So safe and reliable services sits at number 1 in terms of it's 86% responded that that's the top priority. And public ownership sits in second, followed by financially sound. So making sure the services are working well and efficiently is obviously front and centre of mind of the community, with public ownership sitting right in there behind there and making it financially sound. Then it starts looking at resilience, the local priorities, and then mana whānau aspirations. So that just provides you a bit of a flavour, and we'll obviously look at that in a bit more depth once we've got all the submissions in terms of where those priorities sit. So that's how the community ranked those priorities. And whilst we've been out there, we've certainly had plenty of questions and lots of interaction backwards and forwards, and trying to turn those around as fast as possible, because there are people out there in the community asking some really good, crunchy, detailed questions, and people just wanting to understand some of those concepts. We've also been, the comms team have been updating the frequently asked questions. So again, just providing that feedback. If there's one question there, we want to make sure that everyone has the answer and has the same answer and understands it. But some of the specific points of discussion that came through were certainly the consideration of discounted options. Why have we discounted a Kapiti only? Why have we discounted Kapiti Horowhenua CCO options? That was explained in the consultation document and the supporting documents, but just again, it's that they're more expensive, and the additional layers of governance and the cost to service debt, those have been excluded. There are also considerations around the ring fencing of water costs, and Ian will talk to that. And also the 4 council option and the possibility to price harmonise. So obviously, as you appreciate, there are average cost differentials, and we'll go through that. That was a piece of work that was done in looking at the possibilities for other scenarios where price differentials possibly could be held. And so there was a bit of conversation around what are those possible price harmonisation pathways, and the possibilities of those to be explored. Just touching on the Kapiti and Kapiti Horowhenua average cost, I think this is the graph that really explains it. The bottom line here, the mustard line, is the base case for Kapiti. The red is what it would be if it was the 4 council entity, and these two is the jump up that would have to happen in terms of costs if you went to a Kapiti only CCO or a Kapiti Horowhenua CCO. And that's be around the additional setup costs. The smaller scale isn't achieving the scale that a 4 would, and also the ability to service debt drives those costs immediately up on setup. So that was the short answer on that one. Ring fencing.
Thanks, Marty. Morning, everybody. So we've had questions around ring fencing and whether we'll comply with the ring fencing requirements of the new legislation, and the short answer to that is yes. We'll comply with whatever the legislation or regulations of the day are. Certainly, the expectation, you can see it in the communications coming out from ComCom, for example, there's an expectation of heightened levels of information disclosure and scrutiny over the allocation of costs to the water services and then the setting of revenue. So that's the expectation of where that'll go. Irrespective of the model you choose, we know there's going to be a higher standard of information, I guess, that's going to be required. So, as I say, irrespective of the model we choose, there'll be work to be done between now and go live to sort of, I think, particularly around indirect costs, which is, we'll need to lock down methodologies, policies, etc., in order that we're very clear on what we're doing around cost allocation and revenues. Just wanted to note that we do ring fence already. So our current approach broadly, we allocate our costs to our activities, and then we set our rates to fund those activities. And so we've just summarised in the slide there the rates that apply to the water services at the moment. So you can see we've got the for drinking water supply, we've got a combination of a volumetric rate and a targeted fixed rate. They are set close to 50-50, slightly under for volumetric, and I think that general split's been in place since metering was implemented, and it sort of sets a balance between a pure consumption charge, which encourages or incentivises conservation, versus a fixed charge that recognises the fact that a lot of our costs in providing the service are fixed. If you had everything volumetric based on consumption, there'd be a risk of quite a lot of volatility around your recovery. So that sort of approximately 50-50 split is what we have currently and have had since metering. For wastewater, we've got a targeted fixed rate, and then stormwater and flood protection is a combination of a targeted stormwater rate, which is based on areas. So there are 4 separate area maps for each of the main urban areas, and then there's a balance which is around 40% that's recovered through the district-wide general rate, which applies to everybody, and that recognises the fact that there's an element of public benefit or community benefit from flood protection. So that's the way the rates are set currently, and as I say, those figures are set based on the costs that are allocated to those activities.
So this is one area where certainly company concerned ratepayers had concerns, and one of the other areas that, in terms of visibility or clarity over what household rates would look like once Three Waters weren't part of the mix. And again, it came up at the meeting we had in Waikanae, came up in conversations in Paikokariki I had with a couple of people there who are part of that group, and comes through in their submission. The desire to see what would my rates look like at where my house is if you take out Three Waters, because there's concern that there's cross-subsidisation going on at the moment. So originally, the original response, or the responses we were giving to people in that sense, is like, your water charges will go over here onto another bill, and you'll still pay the same. Your rates for whatever's left will be whatever it is. It doesn't go down disproportionately to the amount you're being charged at that comes off in terms of water, and you'll get a bill from someone else if it's a CCO. But there was certainly an underlying feeling that there was cross-subsidisation, so it won't just be the cost that you can see at the moment. There's other costs behind, somewhere in the mix, interest, depreciation, that are spread, and they needed to see what that number looks like. And there was sort of 2 issues there and again, this is the response we provided in FAQs, and I think I did a letter as well, that we can't go through every resident and look at what your rates might look like, because there's so many different iterations of, if you're, again, if you're in the Hautru scheme, if you're in Paikokariki, you don't pay wastewater. If you're in Hautru, you've got a rural scheme. There are if you're urban, and if you're a rural village, there are so many different ways to build those rates up to try and unravel that, and then, we don't know what that charging might look like exactly in 10 years' time. The process we've been through is to give people a relative number that they can look at to compare costs, not to go to individual households and try and model, 25,000 properties on that basis. But that was a key concern. Cross-subsidisation is overinflating and rural was rural ratepayers are paying at the moment. And if you sorted that out, if you separate out the Three Waters into a CCO, then that will straight away, you'll see a reduction in what they're paying. So as Ian's mentioned, we do ring fence costs at the moment. We try and keep those in their separate buckets. There is a little bit, the water supply, we've talked about this before, because we have to use an estimate in terms of use to come up with an amount of revenue for volumetric charging. So we will estimate what the district uses in terms of water demand, and then we will apply that to try and recover all of that volumetric charge for water. But if we have a particularly wet summer, or we can't, it's impossible to come up with a number that's 100% correct in terms of volumetric use. There's always going to be unders and overs, and we've had that issue for the last 13 years, 15 years in terms of and we talked to councils. I'm not sure if we've spoken to you about we had a 5-year target to try and keep that balance neutral. So one year it might be over, another year it might be under. So rather than every year jumping the rates number up to 20, a significant increase in water to try and recover all of that deficit, we'd spread it over the 5-year period to make sure that we were trying to get to a zero sort of balance after 5 years. So, and that means that in an individual year we might be under recovered or over recovered. So you'll see some elements of cost for water that's sitting in that space where we're either under or we're over for a particular year. So that wasn't helping, I guess, some parts of the community in terms of that transparency around why isn't it all just sitting in that charge in the LTP, and I can see exactly what it is. So there's an element of that. And then the other one is the stormwater. So again, from a rural point of view, there's an element in the district-wide charge. So this is really getting into the detail. Obviously some parts of the community really want to know what the detail looks like. So going into the long-term plan, going into the annual plan, looking at the financial structure there and what you charged for under your rates. There's a charge sitting for stormwater and district-wide, which is the flood protection element to it, which is basically, so if you live in rural, you don't have to be connected to the stormwater network to gain some benefit from, not every road being underwater or shops being flooded, parks being underwater. There's a flood protection public good element that goes to district-wide, and then there's a very specific, if you're in a catchment that's covered by our stormwater urban network, then you're charged based on land value, I think it is. No, capital value.
CB.
For that service in that area. So it's a different way of recovering it, and it's not overly transparent to some people. So part of this process has been to make sure that it is very transparent in terms of how that is shown and what we're doing around those charges. So as a result of this, and as Ian's mentioned, you have to do it. The new regulations mean that you have to be transparent, but also you have to be financially behind the scenes. Whatever's going on in your financial system has to be ring-fenced in terms of revenue matches cost, and it's all clearly linked together. So that's certainly one thing that's come through, and we're looking at this year's or next year's annual plan numbers to make sure that is very clear. And if there is any confusion there, we'll be looking at fixing that by making it a lot clearer. So that again, and again, I've seen the several submissions where that's raised as a concern. There was a couple of letters that came in, there's OIRs where that was raised as a concern, and definitely there was a lot of questions around that at the Waikanae public meeting around why haven't you gone down to that level of detail in terms of what my rates look like. How can I make a decision on an option when you can't tell me that I'll be paying $350 a year for wastewater in 5 years' time, or whatever that's, you sum all of that up, that's what it looks like. So we're just not able to do that, and I guess in the time frame that we've had, and we think what we've done is provide a good balance in terms of looking at the overall cost to give you the, again, we're only consulting on the two options, so we're not consulting on 5 or 7, or this wasn't a process where we were entering into that conversation, and so therefore providing everyone with everything. We tried to provide as much as we could. We added more to the website and FAQs through this process, but ultimately it was really on the internal business unit. What does that look like relative to for council CCO? And the consultation is exactly that, on which of these two is your preference based on what we're providing in terms of the data that's here at the moment, and tried to give some more background, as Martin said, around how we got to that point to make that decision by providing some of those previous reports and adding some extra stuff through the. But that's not changing some people's view, is that there should have been more around the alternatives, and so that's, you'll see when we start coming back with themes through the submissions, you'll see all of that stuff.
So the other area I was going to talk about is the debt situation. So you've been asked what the debt projection looks like under the two options, and in particular whether it's necessary to continue with the debt reduction strategy. So these two graphs have been put up in the frequently asked questions section. So the top graph is the in-house option. So it's essentially our LTP option largely. I mean, not quite, because there have been some adjustments made to it, but broadly it represents current council operation, including water. The blue bars are the water debt, the orange bars are non-water debt, and the green line represents the impact of the debt reduction strategy on those numbers. So you can see from about year 6 or 7, that strategy starts to kick in, and so it brings the total level of debt down from that point on through till year 10, and then we've assumed from that point on there's no further debt repayment, so we retain the gains that have been made to that point and then just hold the debt at that lower level. So the green line represents where net debt would be after the debt reduction strategy as per the LTP. And then that's measured against the limit, the blue line up above, which is the 280% of revenue limit that we're required to work to. The lower graph shows the option 2 council without water. So no more blue bars. So the water-related debt has gone, and the limit has been restated based on the residual revenue, because you've got less revenue, you've lost your water revenue as well. Similarly, we've scaled the debt reduction gains proportionate to the revenue. So the remaining revenue outside of water is somewhere around 2/3 of the total. So we've left the strategy in, but we've scaled it back to recognise the fact that it's a smaller organisation. And again, that's measured against the 280% of the reduced revenue. So what you can see there, because the water debt is relatively high, under that lower option, when that is transferred away to the full council CCO, the residual council is in an improved, relatively, an improved borrowing position. And so that's noted. And a question has been asked, therefore, would it be necessary, particularly under that scenario, but I guess under either scenario, would it be necessary to continue with the debt reduction strategy, given that improved borrowing position? So I think that's a fair point, and one that'll need to be considered.
Yeah, we haven't really. I mean, we haven't talked about that through this process with council as to whether there's a preference to move away from that debt repayment approach. But it's definitely, again, as Ian said, you'll see submissions with, they've actually looked at what would your rates look like in year 6 or 7, where if you took away all the Three Waters debt, then you've got much more headroom, so you don't need to be paying down debt at the same rate that you're paying it down at the moment in the LTP. So straight away, there's a potential there for a reduction in costs. Now, whatever way the new entity looks at managing debt and how they deal with that and what they would charge people, we don't know. That's yet to be determined. And but as Ian said, yes, absolutely, and that's something council could decide to do regardless of whether you set up a CCO. If you wanted to review that policy, you can do that every LTP.
Yeah.
You could have a look at changing that, but it is definitely one of those other key things. So what does my rates bill look like? What if you take away all the Three Waters debt? Then how does that affect my rates and what I'm paying once you've got rid of Three Waters? And I think I've seen some numbers there in terms of percentages, which is the same numbers probably that we put up when we were having the conversation in the finance strategy. So I don't know what it is in terms of the debt repayment, 2 or 3%, maybe on top of that in year 6 or 7. But so we can give you more information on that. But again, you could choose to not continue at that same rate if you're ring fencing Three Waters and you've set it up internally and you've got it sitting over here. But was one of the questions that were coming back through the engagement.
Yeah, so I think naturally that will be part of the next LTP cycle to decide what you're doing in that space. But the other point I'd just note is this 280% limit. So you will have you'll be aware of the LGFA change to their foundation policies late last year, which basically allows LGFA to the discretion to agree what they call bespoke arrangements with councils, so that for high growth councils, of which we are one, so they're to go up to 350% of debt. So they're recognising that across the country growth is causing funding pressure, and so their board now has the discretion to enter into, on a case-by-case basis, a higher level, 350%, which would carry you, another 25% above in terms of your limit on application. So I'm just making that point because there is further borrowing capacity potentially available to council above that 280% level if required. I mean, we're working on the assumption we'll manage to 280. That's what we believe we'll do. But there's that potential in the background as well, which offers flexibility.
Yeah, I think the other financial question that came up a couple of times was the why did council lock in the 17% increase this year, and the elements of that associated with Three Waters, knowing that potentially things might change in terms of that space. So by locking in that rates number, there's a view that that's now, that's embedded in the numbers moving forward in terms of increases. So therefore, I mean, it's not necessarily linked to the consultation on the Three Waters, but that was another key question that came up a lot through that process. And again, in terms of a lot of this, and we provided this feedback as well, there are so many assumptions in the mix with all of this stuff, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in terms of the moving forward, that you could change any one of those in terms of around the peripheral, in terms of percentages and it can influence things. So what we've tried to do is just balance all of that and provide as much clarity over what they are, but there's still assumptions around what might and might not happen in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years. And and again, Martin will start to talk about the harmonisation as another one where you could assume all sorts of things and they will change the outcome, but we've based what we've got at the moment on the best information we've got and some of the things that we know are going to happen, facts around, we're being asked to do this by the government. If you want to borrow more money against your current debt levels, then your CCO is the mechanism by which to do that. And
It's probably a natural point to go, let's have some questions. Otherwise we'll truck on and then you'll have to go back 15 slides. So, Coops, you're first up.
Just a couple of questions. Just in terms of the community priorities at first slide. If we could just get back to that, please. Thank you. Just on the percentages, are they percentages of what? So 86% of the people who responded, they rated that the highest?
Yeah, so those are just the raw numbers that are coming out, and I was just working out how they're actually ranked. So some people just tick them on the hard copies, so they might have ticked a couple. Others put 1 to 6. So where those get the highest, they get the highest ranking. I'd have to go back and actually see where those percentages. Those are raw off the data at the moment.
Okay, so it's sort of just ranked 1 to 6.
yeah, there's a form. It was a bit. We had a couple of people come to the pop-ups that were, they just ticked them all equally.
Yeah.
They didn't have a view on whether one was more important than the other. But we did the instructions were to give them a number between 1 and 6.
Yep.
So
Okay. Cool. In terms of the storm protection, was a targeted rate, I think you said.
Yes.
Well, the coastal plan change that's coming in, I'm assuming that will have a component of targeted rates for seawalls and for, how will that affect?
No, this wouldn't affect that. Coastal at the moment, I think is district wide. I'm no rates expert, but it's outside of this process. But that might be something you have a conversation about through that process. There's been conversations historically about where does the benefit lie in terms of coastal protection? Is it just the properties that adjoin the beach, or is it the whole community because everyone can use the beach and has access to it? So that's not part of this conversation, but it is a wider conversation about protection, private-public benefit, cost, scale of some of that. So that would be, a very good thing to be talking about in that context outside of the plan change process, because it's sort of BAU to some extent in terms of that protection that we provide at the moment.
Yep. And lastly, just around that debt reduction, that last graph, that's actually, it's just is what it is, isn't it? We're not picking, don't need to pick between that, or is that, how does that work out down the track? Because the entity may choose a debt reduction mindset, or they might go on expansion.
Yeah, I don't know what the numbers look like in terms of modelling debt repayment for the CCOs that we used for the
Well, if you
comparison.
if you went to the CCO, they take on the opening debt, and then they don't have a debt reduction strategy per se. They model their debt requirements separately. So this is what our residual council would look like under the two options.
But you're right.
So there's no direction from central government as to the debt levels or the debt spending or the strategy of each entity.
I guess the point is the blue line at the top on the two graphs shows the limits that would apply under each of those options. So, provided we can demonstrate we can live within those funding limits, then that would be financially sustainable. And so I'm expecting, when we put in our water services delivery plan later in the year, this sort of thing, they'll be all over, wanting to be confident that in fact, we've got the right investment plan, enough capex, we can fund it within debt limits, etc. So I think this will be scrutinised.
You'd have to think.
That was,
if that CCO's got a 500% ceiling in terms of that ratio, that gives it more flexibility to borrow more money without having to necessarily have a real focus on debt repayment. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the government are giving you that opportunity, is to get into that space so you do have the ability then to borrow more money, but ultimately the money has to be paid back at some point in time. But it's that whole long life infrastructure investment. By lifting that ceiling to 500%, that gives you more ability to borrow more money.
Yeah.
Again, when you're considering 100-year life for some of these assets, 80 years, then that again influences your focus on debt repayment, and you're not, like a lot of councils, trying to balance between Three Waters, community facilities, parks, open space. You don't have the same
it's
drivers.
just a dichotomy, isn't it? That possibly you've got your in-house water entity that has a strategy to take debt up to 500%, but you've got a council strategy to reduce debt as quickly as possible over a 10-year period. So you've got two diverse.
I think that is one of the challenge really, but you then have to look at why you're investing that money in the Three Waters in the first place.
Yep.
If your risk-based approach to investment says the next 10 to 15 years looks like a number that sits under your 280 or whatever that ceiling is, and also provides flexibility, then that's the question you'd ask about why would you then go to a CCO. But if you're not in that position, then again, that's a totally different proposition for that council.
Yeah.
And trying to move away from, I guess that's the government started this process in the first place, to try and move more towards risk-based investment in infrastructure as opposed to political debt ceiling, financial-based decisions that in the past, Havelock part of that conversation, haven't necessarily led to the best outcome for Three Waters. So this new proposal is to take that away, give you more ability to borrow. Independent board that sits above that looks at where is the risk and where should you be spending that money, and makes that, certainly from an engineering point of view, a bit of an easier task to then get on and deliver the work you need to do.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I have a number of questions, if I can remember them all, but most of them are directed to Ian. So the first one, Ian, can you give me an assurance that whatever happens next year, our rate increase will still be about 7%.
Sorry, for which year?
7%.
For the annual plan year?
Yeah.
So currently, what we've put to council is under 7%.
Okay. The second question is, are you going to transfer this organisation? I mean, this organisation, the Three Waters, we form. Are you transferring any debt to them?
If it was the external CCO, the full council option, if it was an independent entity, then yes, the debt revenue would transfer to that entity. And that's the lower graph there, shows what the remaining council picture would look like after that debt had transferred.
So that is still to be decided by councillors, is it? Which?
Yeah, you've got to just make the decision around which delivery option you wish to go with.
So what's the advantage of the first one
Of
to the ratepayers, let's say?
the advantage of the in-house option?
Yeah.
Basically, the average cost for the consumer is lower under that option for the next 20 odd years. That's it in a nutshell.
Okay.
And we believe in other respects it's sustainable.
Okay. The other thing is, Ian, sorry, Ian, but you always give me good answers, so I hope you don't mind me asking questions. My understanding is that the water meters will become irrelevant. Will that be true? If you're going to have a fixed cost for water, then what's the point of having water meters?
I don't think that's true. I think probably the opposite.
Yeah, I think some of the terminology we use has been a little bit confusing for people as well. Maybe the fixed cost, general charge, volumetric. So no, the volumetric charging for water, it's user pays approach to charging for water, which is what we currently have, and it's you get a fixed charge for 50% of those costs, and then you pay per cubic metre for 50% of the rest of those costs to recover it. So we recover 50%. So if it was $10 million to run the water network for the whole of council, 5 million of that has to be recovered back from a fixed charge. 5 million needs to come back from volumetric charging. So we work out average use times $1.39, I think it is a cube at the moment.
Yeah,
and
but
we're not proposing to change that
Yeah.
under either option.
that's all over my head. I mean, that's all very complicated. I just want some basic understanding. I mean, to me, you got 450 submissions. That's a lot for a community for something like this, which should not interest the community that much. Maybe 200. You've got a concerned group of people out there, and I find attending these briefings still confusing. So if I just see a simple body, the Three Waters, all the sewer, water, and what's the name, all joined together, and the cost should not be that greater than what we're paying at the moment. And then you're saying that you're going to have it for water meters because it goes up and down depending on whether it's winter or summer and whatnot. We're going to assume a certain figure. So why if you're assuming a certain figure for water, why are you saying you're still going to use water meters? No, in a simple ABC.
Simple,
answer.
so that's the current system. That's not a change. That's what we do at the moment. I guess in a simple terms, I don't know how much water you're going to use on your property for the year. But at the start of the year, I have to set the amount of rate or the revenue that's going to come back from your water use. So, but it's impossible. So unless you went to a average fixed charge for everyone, which is what we used to have, you wouldn't need water meters.
So you're not going to a fixed charge?
No, in simple terms,
But-
it's all going to be based on how much water you use. Yes, water will be. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, sewage and stormwater is based on a fixed thing, and I know, but what you're proposing seems to be complicated. Anyway, okay, sorry, I still don't know. Get a ratepayer will still not know what it will cost. We talk about figures, but as long as they're assured that the rates increase next year will be 7%, I suppose they'll be happy. But there are 450 submissions. That,
Thanks, Bernie. I think summary of that is, yes, it is complicated when you dig into the details, if you want to, but in essence, we're trying to go with the most simple system by option one, I think. I think it'll become more complicated once we go out to a CCO because we'll have less say around this table around how those figures work out over the long haul, maybe. So, good questions though, because you've exposed to a lot more information, which means there's people in our community who don't have that information who'd be as confused as you are at the moment. So it's good questions to be asking. So thanks, Bernie. Councillor Cofford, Rob.
Lawrence. I think Sean summarised it when he said there are a lot of parameters around this water business. Just two questions. Development contributions, do they feature in this? Are they factored in this? And what percentage have you factored in of the development contribution, and any chance of increasing that?
Today, shall I agree to? Well, obviously the government are looking at that at the moment. They're talking about levies and things like that. In terms of factoring those in terms of revenue, I think the projections were based on our current numbers in terms of what we capture at the moment. So that's the capital,
Yeah.
DC's capital cost
CapEx.
forecasted out, because we already have an element of growth. If you look at again, without trying to overcomplicate things, we, in our long-term plan, in the asset management plans, long-term plan, water, wastewater, stormwater, there's an element of upgrade in there. You know, if you,
Right.
and developer contributions linked to growth-related upgrade costs. So we know what those numbers look like, and we project them out for 20 years, and that 10 years, 20 years, and they are subject to change. They can move around depending on the timing of some of that development. But our investment in that growth is locked into that LTP number, and those are the numbers that have been factored in. I'm assuming Dan hears from Morrison Lowe into the current modelling.
Okay.
So well, I mean, who knows what the government are going to do around levies, but to some extent that doesn't really. It's the cost of the investment in the infrastructure that's driving it. So we know that we have to put a new reservoir in Waikanae to pick up on growth, and 40% of that cost is growth related. So that, you know what that is. It's the makeup in terms of how much they pay and how you derive the formula around what they're paying might change with the government's proposal around levies. I don't know what that's going to look like.
Oh, thank you. Quite a proportion of the water charging is done from without meters, old Hautiri water supply. Any chance of putting meters in there, or will that remain fixed?
Hautiri is a bit different because we know that they are on a trickle-fed supply. So we know, even though there's no meter there, the system works in a way that limits the amount of water that you can actually pull through that connection to 1,000 cubic metres a day. You know, it's not as accurate as a water meter, obviously, but it starts to get quite tricky trying to meter trickle-fed supplies when you've got a restrictor. It's one of the areas where, because we have some of these in the district that are linked to plan change issues, but at the moment we're not proposing to change that.
Okay, thank
because
you.
it's reasonably straightforward.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I've got a couple of questions, and please feel free to say, look, now's not the right time to ask them. I've been sort of, in some areas of this, I've been cruising with what's been going on, because my views it'll become clearer when we get to certain parts, because we haven't had answers to certain things, and there's a lot of clarity. So from my perspective, I'm at sort of one of those points now. So I just want to get a bit more of an understanding. With the option of retaining the Three Waters, which going by the percentages of what is generally the lien at the moment. What does that look like from a council perspective with regards to how we are doing that? I know it's separate as such, and I know it's not an entity per se, but we have to ring fence that from a reporting perspective. Do we separate that out, like, say, take debt for argument's sake? There'll be a certain percentage of debt that's attributed to Three Waters. Do we sort of, and I'll use the bucket analogy here, will that mean that we'll then have a bucket of our Three Waters debt and we'll have a bucket of the rest of the debt, if you like? And then that bucket from the Three Waters debt, that will drive the cost recovery around the water billing.
Well, what you're seeing up there is exactly that in terms of capex. It's debt there,
Just clarifying.
which is what we do currently. But Ian
Yeah.
can elaborate on the.
I mean, essentially, yes, that, what you're describing is how it works. So currently we don't, if you're talking about debt particularly, we don't borrow specifically for the water activity, we borrow for the entire council. But we have, we need to account for the total debt across the activities. And so we've worked through that process, and this goes back to the exercise with DIA, because another question we've been asked quite often is, how do we come up with the opening water debt figure? And the answer is we went through that process with DIA, the national process that they ran a couple of years ago, which ended up agreeing based on, you know, essentially what they did was went back over past activity, past capex, offset by funding received, subsidies, DCs, etc., to come up with a reconciliation of what was reasonable to attribute to water, the Three Water Services. So that's where we've started from, and then we've just mapped forward capex, all those, the same sort of methodology to map it forward. So essentially, this comes back to the level of accounting information that we're going to have to maintain to make sure we can account for all of that, because I'm sure the regulator, one of the key things I want to know is how much debt, how much interest, etc., etc. So yeah, we'll have to maintain all that as we do now.
Yeah, but just in regards to the amount of debt we've got, because I know one of the issues if we'd gone with a CCO type format was our debt ratio with regards to Three Waters, because we've borrowed quite a lot on that Three Waters, but hence why we're in a better situation than what we are. It's not that we're necessarily doing a whole heap of other things better. We've just invested it when we should have invested, where others haven't, and maintain, and tick things forward. We've done what should have been done. So, as a comparison, a council that goes with a CCO, say for argument's sake, they will actually have to literally take all that stuff out, and it all gets transferred over to the CCO, and basically they, sure, we want for a better way of putting it, can forget about it with regards to having to deal with it other than oversight, so to speak.
Yeah, so if we went for that with that option, as you say, the assets, debt, revenue would all transfer across to the new entity.
Yeah.
And then the future projections of what that looks like is what you see in the Morrison Lowe report.
Yep.
And then back in our house, what's left is that lower graph.
Yep.
Which is a relatively improved position because we've transferred a relatively high proportion of debt to the new entity.
But fundamentally, at the end of the day, the money will still come out of the same pocket on the other end. We've just got a lot more, should we say, control over that than what we'll have if it goes to a CCO. In theory. Our residents will receive an invoice from the CCO as well as a residual invoice for the non-water services from council.
But there are mechanisms under the CCO to have more transparency around that.
That's all good.
So there are some levers in there, but again, I don't believe that would give you as much control as if you were running the IBU, because then the water services strategy has to come through that process through the council, even though you have to demonstrate that it sits over here, but the entity providing it is still council with us internally. But also that debt with the CCO is still underwritten by council?
Yeah, we have to guarantee it.
Yeah, so
really?
that's still part of it. So we will have a view on on what happens there.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's pretty clear. So when is this due to kick in? specifically? When do we start showing this in regards to our reporting back to the community? When does the actual transfer happen? I know we're going to have a plan, should we say, that we have to submit to in September. That's fundamentally what I'm just hearing is going to be ready in June to go through whatever requirement that needs to go to get it to that. When does it actually get put in place? When does this all get put in place? Is it the next annual plan? Is it the next long-term plan? Do we know that at the moment?
I think that, so there's the reporting requirements that are sort of bound up with Bill 3 at the moment, and as far as I'm aware, I think they're 2026 base date. So we will have to start reporting this, how we run the Three Waters business differently from next year, or from 1 July 2026. So you have to have a delivery, you have to have a plan if you're moving to a CCO or whatever you're doing in terms of that structure, which you get a bit more time over. I don't know if there's a timeline in there. We've been talking about 2027, the LTP.
That would stand to
As
reason.
being the date that we would look to go live with that, because of all the, you know, you do the work up front. But in terms of reporting, I'm pretty sure it's 2026, and I know Wellington Water at the moment, there was something that came out earlier or late last week talking about starting to pull together how that reporting, what that looks like sooner rather than later. So the ring fencing, all of those reporting requirements, I'm pretty sure it's 1 July 2026.
So, sorry, just to be really crystal clear, the reporting aspect needs to be in place by the beginning of the next financial year.
Yeah, the one after.
Oh, sorry, not the next one year, it'll be the one after. No, 2026. Yeah, no, this year will be July 1st.
Yes.
That will be July 1st, 2026. That's the reporting aspect, but our, should we say, what we report back on with regards to our long-term plan, how we do it, will pretty much will stay the same. And then coming into the next long-term plan, there'll be the actual adjustments to that document of what that looks like, and it will show two separate things that we report back to the community. Is that sounding right?
Yeah, we haven't done the. You
I
might
get that.
have the requirements are different for the Three Waters, but they're very similar in terms of. I know it's not called an LTP, but you've got to show the 10-year. You've got an infrastructure. You've got a strategy there. You've got the same information provided.
It's fundamentally all the work that we currently do, but it's just, if you like, should we say it's going to have its own book?
Yeah, and I think there'll be more work. There's been talk around. We've added some additional funding to add some more resource into that space for reporting. So we're saying yes, there will be more compliance-related costs. So Te Mata Arawai, the regulator at the moment, they were set up 3 years ago, maybe.
DIA's done 350k, hasn't it?
Yeah, but we allowed for extra resource to meet those regulatory requirements in terms of resource for the council. So we've done the same thing for the Commerce Commission requirements. But that's our estimate. What you'll probably find is that there'll be more scrutiny around your asset management, your planning. How do you know that your network looks like this? And how do you know that your investment for the next 10 years reflects what you need to spend in terms of that condition of your network? So lots of councils do, TV inspections of sewers and other bits and pieces. So we've certainly anticipating that there'll be a lot more scrutiny applied to your whole of life cost assumptions, your criticality risk. How do you know that you need to spend $500,000 in renewals and water every year for the next 20 years? That will have to be supported by, business case process. I don't know. A lot of that stuff
To come.
Yeah, but it will be more than we do at the moment.
Yeah, okay. And in regards to debt reduction, that we would, any strategy that we look at with regards to when we split that stuff out, there'll be an in-house arrangement where it'll show what the debt is in relation to Three Waters. But if we're paying down debt, it'll also show what that looks like in relation to the waters versus the rest of the organisation, because we'll have to report on that separately, won't we?
Whatever way the council choose to represent it publicly, you can. But then, we'll have to provide that. I don't know if it's a separate set of accounts or whatever. It'll be audited by, at the moment, EY audit our accounts. I assume Commerce Commission will audit the Three Waters.
That's cool. I've got some other questions I could push into it, but I think now it's not the right time for it. I think later another few months with regards. So that's great. Thank you for that.
Councillor Warwick.
I'm like Bernie, I get more confused. So this entity, the water will be an entity separate to council but within council, which would mean that the bottom graph does relate to rates, but the entity of water is also able to borrow up to 500%, which would push up rates. And who decides that? Like, does that entity still have to come back to council for decision, or is it independent?
So
If it's
CCO,
No, the business unit.
the 500% only relates to the CCO conversation.
Okay.
And so, I mean, internally as an entity, it's a financial, it's a financial structure around delivering the services that shows visibility separate to the rest of the organisation, but together. If we have to financially report it differently, but it doesn't change. We still have a water and wastewater business unit, staff delivering services. We're not moving out of the building. It'll be the same on the surface, but behind the in Ian's space, it'll be a whole lot more structure around separating those costs from council, whether that's all the overheads and everything else, and you have a different level of reporting. But if it goes to a CCO, then you're into that 500%, an independent board. Council sets the statement of proposal or whatever it is in terms of CCO expectation, but it's run by a board, and you're a shareholder, so you don't lose control totally, but it's different to what you do at the moment.
And so with the internal business unit, do you have an idea? You had the rates as they are now. How's that gonna? Do you have an idea of how it's gonna be presented on the rates? Like, is it gonna be two completely separate rates bills, or is it just gonna be all rolled into one? So you can identify them separately, because we're changing the way we're doing stuff. Not really, but on paper. But are we going to change it on the paper that people get, so they understand what they are paying
Yeah,
for?
and it'll be on the same. Well, I would have thought it makes more sense to have one bill with a separate page or whatever you want to call it with those charges on it. If it's an internal business unit, we're currently, as we talked about, moving to have the fixed charge for water on the same bill for your rates, again to make it more transparent. And I mentioned earlier on, making it very clear for residents what they're paying for. What does that look like, and being very clear about the terminology as to what that means is something that it's been good feedback through this process to make sure that it's a lot easier for people to understand and to see where that funding's going. So, I mean, whether it's two bills or, because again, it's more efficient probably to just send out one with a separate. Yeah, make it absolutely crystal clear. This is exactly what your costs are, and this is where your contribution is going in terms of that to that cost. And that's interest, depreciation, all of those costs associated with the three waters.
So can I just, in that, one of the unique things for us as a council that probably separates from others is we are already ring fencing water income, which not every council in New Zealand already does that. Is that?
I would think all councils would have a similar approach and principle of costing activities and setting rates to fund those activities. So in principle, I think others will be doing the same sort of thing.
Our difference is we've got meters, therefore we can be accurate with our user pays system in that, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right, Mr. Olsen.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the advantages of the in-house, of course, is there's a level of shared costs that can be done for staff and, everything else. So, where it makes sense. So if we were to look at that, some of the shared costs on the staffing is, of course, like CE, GM, and if I look around here, I see legal, I see comms, service desk. So there's quite a lot of shared costs there. But then, of course, there'll be like IT and, buildings and stuff like that, which are all going to be shared as well. So question is, how is it going to be calculated, the cost between those two, the ring fenced and the rest of the council? And then, I guess, how is it going to be reported and cross-charged between them?
Yeah, so that's right. So the one of the reasons that the external CCO is higher is that those costs get duplicated, so they take on their own all the things you just described, staffing, etc. So that's one of the reasons why that option 2 is more expensive. Coming back to your question about internally, how would we allocate the costs? That's sort of what I touched on earlier. There needs to be, so currently we have an approach, where it gets, probably the nuances around shared costs, overheads and how you choose to attribute those. And so currently we'd use proportion of headcount, for example, to work out how we distribute the costs of the CE's office across the business, for example. It's that type of thing. And I think we need to go through all of that with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that the logic behind how all these costs are allocated are as appropriate as possible. I've seen somewhere from ComCom, it might have been, talking about the allocation of property costs, for example, being based on square metres occupied by a business, So there's a level, and that would be more sophisticated than what we have currently. But it's that type of thing with, that I can see us needing to do work to document our processes, our methodologies, and then apportion costs on that basis. Yeah.
But at the end of it, it's just a line on the accounts would be some form of a cross-charge going between the two.
Ultimately, it's a cost that gets allocated to the activity, and then we set the revenue at a level to recover all costs, including those types of things. And so I imagine all of that will be the sort of thing that the regulator will be reviewing to make sure it's all reasonable.
And how do the staff work? Do staff remain just employed by KCDC, or would there be some, way of, how would they be distinguished between the two, the internal entity and the rest of the council? Or does it have to be done?
Well, again, if we choose, what we have today is an in-house business unit. So if we choose option 1, it's essentially that, but with higher requirements around reporting, etc. So staff, if we chose option 1, staff would continue to be employed by council.
Yeah, we haven't really. We haven't really talked about what that looks like structurally, but you might do something like that makes it simpler, maybe from a visibility point of view, and whatever the council might just choose to do in the future. But certainly that overhead allocation, we'll have to have a look at that, and that might be again. If you're not paying for any of those services, making sure it's visible that if you are paying for it, it links back to if it's that overhead cost. It's fairly, we've talked about timesheets and things like that. We do capital cost at the moment for project delivery. It's split up like that in terms of time, effort within each area back to those projects. So again, it's a financial exercise to see how best to make that work. Ian?
Cool. Okay. It'll be interesting to see how it pans out here. Cool.
Okay, Marty, you want another bite at the cherry?
No, just a simple one.
Okay.
And it's the wonders of building the plane while you're flying, isn't it? Fundamentally, with regards to it. So I just want to be really, really, again, I just want to get crystal clear on something. Because part of the conversation has been bills going down and up and all that sort of scenario. So option 1, in-house model, you're not going to get a rates bill fundamentally that's any different than what it is now, figure-wise, but the layout of that bill is going to change. It's going to become bigger. You're going to have that delineation between water and the rest of the organisation.
And the cost of water is going to go up as a result of compliance-related costs.
Yep.
And in theory, if there is any sort of cross-subsidy going on that we're not aware of, and that from a rural, if you're not provided with those services, then it will become a lot more obvious and a lot clearer as to what you are paying for. And if you're not receiving them, then unless it's like the stormwater where there's a general community benefit associated with flood protection, then that won't be on your rates bill.
But fundamentally, the bill's not going to, it's just going to look like a bigger, more in-depth bill than what you've got at the moment. If it was a CCO, it'd be a completely different scenario. We'd be taking all the assets out and everything like that, and we'd be reporting a smaller figure, and you'd be getting a separate bill for your water, and then you'd add the two together to hopefully get what your current rates equivalent is. But we know it wouldn't be that; it would be more. Okay, so that's cool. That's part of the questions we've been having. If it gets moved out, does it go down? But in-house, that bill doesn't change. It's going to look the same. It's just going to look a bit more in depth. Yeah, look, it changes every year. Don't get me wrong. It changes every year. I'm not saying it's locked into the current figure. It's just how it's broken down, if you like. You're going to get that one bill, and it shows this is my rates for that year. You're not going to get a second one. We're going to get your volume. What's going to happen with the volumetric charge, because that is a separate bill at the moment.
Yeah, as I mentioned, with the fixed component of that, again, without getting into making it more complicated, was going to be on your rates bill, but you'll still receive the volumetric charge because it's quarterly.
So we're moving that volumetric charge into this annual plan, isn't it?
It's happening as part of this.
Yep, so that we're front-footing that process.
Yes.
Is that why we're doing that? Just getting ourselves ready as part of that, what that bill looks like.
Yeah. But the other, so again, wastewater is another, again, some feedback coming through this process as well. If it's more user pays, maybe there should be a user pays charge for wastewater.
Conversation for further.
But again, that could be a conversation the council has at any time. It's not linked to the changes. It's not it's not prerequisite on setting up an internal business unit.
Carrot duty. But that's a conversation, and again, like the three water, I'm sure when the meters went in the first place, it would be a very interesting conversation as well. But okay, just wanted the clarity on that. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Mr. Randall, you want another turn too?
No, I made an error when I asked Ian a question earlier about the rate increase of being 7% as per the long-term plan. I'm talking about the annual plan for next year. Sorry, after July of next year. Right, after July of next year.
So 26, 27.
Yeah, when this water.
Year 3 of this long-term plan
Yeah,
you're
but
asking about.
when this water rate, this water, whatever it is, will kick in. So that will still be, per the long-term plan, of a rate increase of 7%. And follow on from that, also in the long-term plan, I think it's year 5 or 6, I stand to be corrected, where you'll be repaying debt, so you won't be borrowing anymore. Is that going to be the same, or is it going to be pushed out?
Bernie, I'm going to ask the CE to answer that question for you.
Thanks, Bernie. Good question. So I guess in its most simplistic answer, yes, the approach is as outlined in the long-term plan. 7% is what we are looking to hold to. As far as the financial strategy, we will redo the long-term plan 27. So it will be the will of the council whether or not they want to continue with the financial strategy of reducing what is needed through borrowings and then starting to reduce debt. It will certainly be my preference to continue with the financial strategy because it's about keeping us sustainable out to year 10, 15, 20 when we've got some big projects coming. So that would be my approach, but of course it will be for the council of the day to make that decision.
Vote wisely, people. Right, we've got a few more slides, so let's get them done so we can head out to lunch.
Okay, thank you. And I thought that was the straightforward stuff. So,
Thanks, Marty. It's
and
great.
I guess it just makes you realise how much material is out there, how much has been out on the website, and how much people have dived into this in terms of trying to understand it to the level that they can be satisfied to offer an opinion to support council on its decision making. So the other part, and you will have seen this graph quite a few times, is the work that Morris and Lowe have done for us on calculating the average cost per household, residential household, to give a comparative of the different options. So what we have there again is the mustard colour one is the Kapiti in-house projected costs over time. The red is if we all joined up in a 4 CCO, what that average cost would, and it's an average cost. And then the other dotted lines are, the big one here is Palmerston North and their wastewater treatment plant upgrade, and then Horowhenua and the ongoing upgrades and growth components in Manawatu. So that paints the picture of the 4 councils' projected costs as base costs. Now, if you took all of those and just averaged them out and said we charge one price, and that's the average price, that's what the red line is. So clearly with that, if we were to follow that as a price path, not a cost, Kapiti would have to pay more, would have to pay more into the cost of running that, and Horowhenua and Palmerston North would receive the benefit of those costs and sharing together. So the question's been asked, and rightly so, is, well, what are the options? What are the what-if scenarios? If that's the differential of $500 or $600 on your rates bill for water, if we joined with a 4, what could we do, or what are the theoretical scenarios that could run? That is there a scenario where Kapiti wouldn't pay any more? So Morrison though have run through some scenarios, and it's called price harmonisation. At what point do you all join together at the same price? So the projected price, if we all harmonise from day one, would start growing up in this red line, and eventually meet up to where Kapiti would have got to some 24 years out. There are a number of other options to do that. You could harmonise after 3 years, 5 years or 7 years, and we've looked at that. You could harmonise after 20 years, or even not harmonise at all. It brings its own challenges, because if you don't bring all that pricing together, you then have to separately account for each one of those councils and each one of those activities. So it ends up being 4 councils by 3 activities of 12 sets of accounts across the new entity. So it brings another level of complexity. But Morrison Lowe have explored the what-ifs to sort of make sure that stone has not been left unturned in terms of what-if scenarios. I'll just take you through a few of these. That one. So this is the 3, 5, 7 and 10 year. So that's the Kapiti line again there in the mustard. The dotted line there, and apologies for the change in colours there, that's the 4 council option. So we could arguably, Kapiti could stay on a lower price path and then jump up after 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years. So those are the options. Effectively, if you harmonise the pricing anywhere in the first 10 years, Kapiti becomes a net contributor into that 4 council CCO. It's not till about 24 years based on the projected modelling that it comes about even. So consequently, if you harmonised anywhere in that first 10 years, Kapiti would be a net contributor, and the other councils would be net benefiters effectively from that solution. So it's a possibility, but whether it's a probability is yet, is undetermined, whether it would be a possibility. This graph gets a little bit more complicated again. The blue line, and again, I apologise for the change in colours, Kapiti Manawatu along the bottom. The blue line is the 4, and the other lines are, the high one here is Palmerston North and then Horowhenua. So if we looked at harmonising the pricing over 20 years, then what happens is that Palmerston North would have to pay about what they pay now. There'd be possibly some efficiencies around the financing side of it. They could get better rates, but essentially their cost curve sits pretty much where it is, and same with Horowhenua. Kapiti arguably could pay along its similar cost curve until it meets the 4 council CCO and then harmonise then. But that's all subject to a lot of conversation and agreement of the 4 that's a model or possibility that we'd want to explore or even consider. You go even further out to 30, and then you could ultimately look at a non-harmonised pricing, and that's essentially what you've got had happening in Wellington, where each council pays for its own piece of the puzzle and arguably generates the benefits out of the bigger organisation. So those options were presented in the Morrison Lowe report, and I just wanted to share those with you because it's a piece of conversation that had been occurring out in the community in terms of what are the other options. So again, it's back to, that's the average price. If we all came together and paid the average, it's going to go up. but there are some other possibilities, but it's whether they're probabilities was the question I think sits there.
Yeah, and that again was one of the key things that have come back through some of the feedback. Why not gain the efficiencies in terms of a CCO? Again, there's a whole lot of assumptions around what those efficiencies might look like, but bigger entity, larger return in terms of procurement savings, more resilience. Why not set that up, but retain council fees or charges for those services at the same level that they would have been if it was run in-house? Separate them out and lock those in some shape or form and get everyone to agree up front from the CCO perspective that that's how you're going to run the entity. And again, as Martin said, there's a whole lot of assumptions and unknowns around how you might make that work, but it's not to say that they don't exist as options. There are multiple options you could look at in terms of how you might make that work. But again, it's what's the key driver for moving you towards that CCO option, really, I think is and again, efficiency's there, and I think Morrison Lowe put maybe 10 or 15%, 10, I think, 14% over a period of time. The Labor government, when they were going through this process, had 46% efficiency savings. Now, I think that might have been a little bit optimistic, but and I think Gravel Road, I think with the Wellington model, they assumed a lower number. I don't think their initial numbers included efficiency. It was zero, because their view was there were a whole lot of inefficiencies as well, and other costs that would cancel that out. But there has to be some efficiency in having a larger entity of that scale when you don't have 4 asset managers all running their 4 separate. If you combine them and integrate them, I guess that to me would be the key. Efficiencies in that delivery to some extent are based on, so you have one system. So you'll combine your SCADA telemetry system, you've got one system, so you only need to have one set of contract providers providing those services. You combine your operational services, and so you don't have 4 separate levels of service. So levels of service dictate cost. So if you're going to have different costs for each of those entities, then you'd have to come up with some way to make that work. And maybe it's just an overarching bill that sits on top of an organisation, distribution of costs that sit underneath it in some way. So, but it is definitely a key thing that some parts of the community think is worth exploring. And again, we presented the numbers, but it does come with a whole lot of risk around how you might make that work, and is it as efficient as running a CCO that doesn't have to do that? Then that's the question really you'd have to, and how much certainty can you have over that ongoing structure, and you can do things at the start in terms of but I think in the current Bill 3, maybe the entity, the cease is legally responsible for setting the charges. Don't think that council has much say in that, so you'd have to lock in something up front to, I don't know, fix it to a cap or something, or maybe it's how you derive those charges has to be based on only those costs associated with each individual council, so that again you've got to separate those out. And we haven't gone down to how does it work, because that's the next iteration really. But certainly Morrison Lowe have done a fair bit of work on these different, any different one of those scenarios you could put up and look it up.
Well, I don't see any questions in relation to the harmonisation bit, so shall we move on to the next steps?
Right, so the next steps from here, just as a bit of an overview, is obviously the consultation feedback in detail, pulling in those emailed and hard copies and entering all of those and doing the analysis for that and providing that back to yourselves. We've got hearings scheduled for the 1st of May, and I don't know the number off my top of my head, but it might be into double digits in terms of people that want to speak to those submissions. Compared with the 500 submissions, it's in the ones and tens maybe of people that want to come and speak to their submissions. So that's the 1st of May. We're looking to put another briefing in on the 15th of May, just prior to that decision making for council on the 27th, and that's when council will look at making a decision around what model, whether it's an in-house business unit or the for council CCO. That's that decision on the 27th. And then from there, it flows out to, there's quite a bit of work that needs to happen off the back of that decision in terms of preparing the water services delivery and implementation plan. So this is mapping out exactly what that looks like using the numbers we've got here, and how is that going to be implemented. So that would start to flesh out some of that due diligence around the detail of the ring fencing, and making sure that all the costs are sitting exactly where they should in terms of contributions. That's then adopted at the end of June and then submitted to the DIA for the 3rd of September, and then that's the starting line.
That that water service delivery implementation plan, I'm assuming that that's currently being worked on, or is that work it has? If we went to that's obviously got a cost
Yes.
to the council.
Yes.
So if it went to a CCO, we would charge that cost on.
Yeah,
And
you have to
reclaim
do that water service delivery plan has to be done up front, like now, before you set up the CCO. So, and we've already committed, so we've spent some of that money already to get us, because we've only got till September to finish it off. So, yes,
So we could claim it back. We couldn't.
off the government.
No, off the
Well, we could
CCO.
try.
Off the CCO.
I don't know if you could send them a bill maybe, but whether they'd pay it or not, it's the same ratepayers paying the cost. It's not a huge. We're not talking hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay.
No, so it's a manageable number at the moment.
Yep. Yep. Okay. That's good. I'm assuming that's a fair way down the track too.
Well, no, you have to have it lodged by the 3rd of September. So we might have done 30%, 40% of the work maybe.
Yeah, cool.
So Morrison Lowe are helping us do that as well. So it actually works quite well because they're doing all the regional modelling. So we can get that done a hell of a lot cheaper, obviously, when we're sort of locking in that.
We like that phrase, cheaper. It's awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you again. I don't have any hands online, and in the room, no questions. So well done, team. Another great briefing. Just wanted to acknowledge the 520 plus people who have contributed to our consultation on this particular topic from the public. I just want to say thank you. It's really important for us as elected members to hear your contributions to our decision-making process, and to have a 94% indicative at this stage of support for option 1. It's a pretty clear direction from that consultation. So thank you to everyone who's contributed to that. Just a reminder, if you're wanting more information, for those of you who will watch to this point of the briefing, our website is still current, and we are updating the frequently asked questions as we come across things through the submissions that just need to be added. So if you're wanting to get into more information, maybe you missed on the consultation, you want to find out some more, then go there and have a look. Otherwise, that's us for this briefing. Thanks, everyone.
Lawrence, I know it's raw data and that sort of stuff, but do we know how many people have asked to speak to their submissions at the moment?
Yeah, I think, so last week there was about 3 or 4.
Oh, is that all?
7. 7 at the moment out of the ones we've been through. So you might get a couple of, I've seen one, not sure if that's in that list at the moment, but yeah, we're talking less than 10, I'd say.
Okay,
Right,
that's
10 at the
cool. So
most.
we'll fit it in that day that we've put aside for it.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool.
All right. Great. Thank you, everyone. Let's break now.